someone. So for example, I appear to be feminine presenting, however, I might not choose to present myself as she, her, and hers. So because I am cisgender woman, I do say she, her, and hers as a way, again, to make that more inclusive of a space. My job title is Leadership and Social Justice Programs Coordinator. I work at California State University, Fresno. I am very passionate about the field of recreation. I received my bachelor's degree in recreation administration and then realized I wanted to program for students in higher education, which is why I received my master's in higher ed administration leadership. I am here talking about embracing our diverse communities. As mentioned, I'm very passionate about helping and serving others. So it was in grad school when I realized that as a white person, I have privilege and responsibility to help in ending racism and speaking up against oppression and advocating for marginalized populations. So that is why I'm here to talk to you today. I do want to say that I don't believe anyone can be an expert in the area of diversity, but I do believe that we can all constantly be learning from each other. And that's really what we want to happen today. We want us all to be able to engage with one another in order to best serve the communities that we are with.
Absolutely, and I would like to echo those sentiments. My name is Brandon Taylor. I'm an assistant professor at Fresno State in the community recreation youth services emphasis within our department. I'm also a former just outgoing Region 3 rep for the CPRS State Board, representing essentially what we affectionately call the Middle Kingdom, central part of the state. And the way that I view kind of the work that I do is looking at social change through the recreational programming offerings that we have within our communities. My experience, I worked in the field for about 14 years here in the Central Valley, running different types of recreational programs for diverse communities. And really just looking to start conversations within your communities on what diversity means, how do we reach out to our community as a whole, and are we really meeting the needs or looking to meet the needs of those within our community. So typically when we do this in a live face-to-face format, I have a saying that I utilize, which is what you see here, what you hear here, let it stay here when you leave here. And that's just really saying that typically we have an opportunity to share information about ourselves through this session. We'll see how that goes with this virtual type of format, but there could be some information that would be shared that is very personal, that other folks may not want shared outside of the room. So really what we focus on is sharing the learning, but not the personal attributes of the individuals within our session here. And then I always throw in a disclaimer that the opinions and views expressed through this session do not necessarily represent CPRS or your agencies or Fresno State. This is both myself and Sophie's perspective on how services should be offered and reaching out to our communities. So we just throw that disclaimer out there as well.
Okay, so we did ask you all to enter in why you chose this session. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you all.
Be safe. I said be safe.
Okay, let's see here. Can everyone see the word cloud? I see Brandon nodding his head, so that's good. Okay, so we want to just talk about a few of these words that you all selected or entered in. Oh, and we keep seeing them come in, so that's awesome. So why did you choose to participate in this particular session? So I see words such as community, diverse, interesting, joined, engaged. These are all really awesome. Hope, I love that one. Timely, important, growing, that's a really good word as well. Supervisor, okay, so maybe this is going to help you in your supervisory skills.
Yeah, I see personal, growing, learning, interaction. So I love the action words that we're having with this word cloud as well, showing that this is something that many of you are looking to put into practice or to have these conversations within your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of leads me into our learning outcomes that I want to review just a little bit. So we really do hope that you are going to be engaged during this conversation. There are some areas where we're going to ask for your feedback and for your experiences in your professions. So we hope that everyone will be able to engage with one another, and that this will be a brave space, a learning conference for us, where we can share, you know, as Brandon mentioned, we're going to be sharing our personal information, and this is really just a space for us to grow. So the more you allow yourself to engage, the more that you'll be able to learn and grow from the experience. So with that, we do hope that you have a better understanding of how embracing diversity within your community can help to provide more effective services. And also, we hope to break down the importance of educating staff on cultural competencies and the importance of developing a culturally responsive approach when serving others. So we'll be talking about that term a little bit later, culturally responsive, but that's just a little bit of an insight as to what you can expect from this session. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our presentation here. And we're actually going to start out with an activity. So it's a little bit tricky since we are on Zoom, but we thought it would be a good idea for everyone to utilize the chat feature for this. So what we're going to ask is for everyone to type in 5 of your personal identities into the chat section. And we're going to show you an example of this in just a bit. But when you think of these 5 personal identities, one of them has to be the way that you identify racially, ethnically, or culturally. So what we're going to do is show you an example. So Brandon and I created our own.
Yeah, so typically what we do with this session is each of you would have received a piece of paper where you can write down some of your identities. Go ahead and advance the slide there, Sophie. And as an example, these are the identities that I would list on my paper. So those that are have more of an impact or are more important to us, we would list in larger text. Obviously, within the chat room, you won't have the opportunity to do that, but you can see some of the identities that I carry. The nice thing about identities is we have the opportunity to claim them rather than them be labeled upon us in many cases. So as you can see, American of African descent, and then just some others, husband, former collegiate athlete, introverted most of the time, what many would consider highly educated, and then also cis male, which means that the gender that I was assigned, quote unquote, assigned at birth is the gender that I identify with still. And then on the back side, what we would like is, or in the chat, is to list some of the impacts that those identities that you perceive and feel that those identities have upon you, right? So based on some of those identities that I listed on the first page, can be stereotyped, right? Based on a number of those identities, can be seen as aggressive, sometimes very smart, sometimes uneducated, intimidating, so on and so forth, right? So you can kind of see where the interface of our identities and how we interact with others or how others interact with us through those identities have an impact on us. And I know, Sophie, you've done one as well.
Yeah, so I did one, let me see here. There we go. So for mine, we had mentioned that we want you to put racially, ethnically, or culturally. So mine is white race, Greek and Italian ethnicity. I'm a cisgender woman. So again, gender assigned at birth is the gender that I identify with as a woman. I am a supervisor. I am an advocate. I'm a dog mom. So I try to be a little playful with this. And then also pansexual. This is my sexual orientation. So a lot of people might not know what that term is. Pansexual means you are attracted to people physically and emotionally of all genders. So you can be in a relationship with someone despite what their gender is. And then for my impacts, so some of my impacts of my identities also can be stereotyped. I was thinking of fruit supervisor for bossy, but that also goes hand in hand with caring, because even though sometimes people can see a female supervisor as bossy, I'm very caring. Loves food, that's for part of my Greek and Italian, and that is 100% true. Confused, that's in regards to the sexual identity. So some people might see me as just confused because I can fall in love with someone of any gender, or that I'm lying. So those are different impacts that other people might perceive me as. And then I also put on there that I can be perceived as ignorant. However, a lot of these identities, I'm very much of a hard worker, privileged, and brave. So those are different impacts that I have as a result of some of my identities.
Excellent. I see a number of our participants have started to share in the chat area. So let's take about 30 seconds to, one, either type in those that are still typing, or to get a sense of who else is in the room. So you can scroll up and down the chat box that you may have there listed, just to get a sense of the identities that are in the room and some of the impacts that folks feel those identities have on them. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump back into it. And thank you all for sharing that information, and the chat is still, will remain up there. So as we continue through the session to get some different perspectives of who's in the room, that opportunity will be there as well. Next slide. So in terms of the conversation around this exercise is really looking at how important is it that we have the ability to self-identify, right? So in many instances, labels are placed upon us based on the interactions that we have, based on those identities that we claim, that we may or may not have the ability to influence, right? So you can imagine in some communities, if I were to go into some communities, I'm perceived in one way. If I go into other communities, I may be perceived in a different manner. So in the chat box, again, if you all could just kind of list how important is your ability to self-identify. So one being unimportant, meaning you're really not concerned. Maybe it isn't something that you feel has impacted you to this point. Or through 5, where it is very important or important to you to have that ability to not only self-identify, but make sure that those perspectives are heard as well. And then the other thing to think about is for the remainder of your life, if you could only choose one identity, and these are more rhetorical questions at this point, but if you can only choose one, could you, right? So meaning this is how you would be presented or identified throughout. Would you, and why or why not, right? So just kind of self-thinking in that perspective of how important it is to be able to self-identify and then have the opportunity to identify as various things within our own identities.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is the time of the session where I get to geek out a little bit. So I do have my caveat there of hang with me a little bit on this. We're gonna go through some analytics and really just looking at statistics based around different dimensions of diversity. So this first one here is looking at the population of the state of California. So you can see in 2018, just under 40 million people were the estimates. And then state-to-state migration. So recently there's been a lot of discussion about the state-to-state migration and how California is losing more residents from state to state than it's gaining, which is true. However, oftentimes what's left out of the conversation is this isn't really a phenomena. It's something that's gone back to the early 90s in terms of this particular kind of exodus, if you want to use that term, from the state of California. The interesting thing that I find on this is, one, that our population continues to increase. So even though since the early 90s, we've lost more residents within our state moving to other states than those who have moved to our states, our population continues to grow within our state. And when we look at who's immigrating to our state, here's the breakdowns from 2010 to 2017. So general population categories, Asian, 56% of those who are immigrating to the state of California. But that represents 48 different countries, right? So a lot of diversity within that migration pattern from Asia. And then also Latin America, so 29% of immigrants are coming from Latin America, but again, 33 different countries, and you can imagine the diversity amongst those countries as well. Our next slide looks at the aging population, and this is estimating from 2015 to 2030. So you can see there's going to be a large influx of 60 and older population, which I think many of us are aware of at this point in time. We have a lot of discussions throughout CPRS about age and how the trends are shifting in terms of the types of programming that community likes to engage in. So just a perspective for up to 2030, and then you can imagine there's going to be a large shift another 10, 15 years from that point, so 2040, 2045, to speak a little bit morbidly, where these folks in the older age brackets start to pass on. And then we start to look at the other ages and what are the types of programming that our communities may be interested in. The next slide here shows parenting. There's information on parenting. So 1 in 4 US parents are unmarried. But also that we have a good deal, and these are within the state of California for the unmarried parents, but that are cohabitating. Sorry, excuse me, these are for the US, that unmarried parents are cohabitating. So you can see a shift from the 1960s to 97, where, and then also to 2017, where we have 35% of all unmarried parents are now cohabitating, which is a shift in what we consider the nuclear or traditional types of families, right? Even though mom and dad may not be married, they're still living together in the same household with their child. Our next slide here looks at the LGBTQ plus within California. So total population, 1.6 million. Within the state, the number of same-sex couples within our state, 98,000. So again, looking at that change of what is a couple, what is marriage, what does that look like within our communities? Are we inviting these folks into our programs? The general population, 5.3%, and then 30% of LGBTQ plus individuals are raising children. So again, looking at that shift in families and how children are raised and in which households they're raised in as well. Then our last slide here in terms of the analytics looks at ethnic groups within the state of California. So you can see from 1980 to 2017, and then the projection to 2030. And you can see that our communities, while it may be incremental changes between 2017, 2030, there's still some shifting that is taking place there within our communities. And we need to start looking at how are we meeting the needs of all of these groups, plus those that may not be listed here within our communities as well.
Okay, so basically everything that those analytics is representing is that we are constantly evolving within our communities. We're constantly becoming more diverse. And I actually saw someone in the chat had stated that we are all constantly evolving. So we're going to switch into talking about cultural competency. And for this section, we do have a video that we would like to play. So if for any reason you're having a hard time hearing it or something, just please let us know in the chat and we'll try to work on that.
Now, international cultural competence is probably the most used framework for working across countries. It's very valued, particularly because it's open to evaluation. People can actually evaluate. You can have a training program for half a day, and at the end of it, you'll judge culturally competent. Skills and macro skills, you have a particular attitude of openness and tolerance sometimes. You cannot be competent at working with people. It's not possible because when you're working with culture, it's a process. It's not an end in itself. It's about learning from that process. It's about engaging with people. There's no way that you can be. It's actually a very top-down approach when you say that you can be competent at working with people, especially through doing a half-day workshop. It's pretty much impossible, or a one-day workshop, or even a two-day workshop. It happens when you're actually engaging with people. So first of all, competence is a very problematic concept. Secondly, the cultural competence does not look at power differentials. Nowhere in it is the notion of racism, the notion of privilege of particular communities, the notion of challenging some of these ideas of racism, all of these kind of things. Nowhere is it. And that's a huge problem, especially when you look at the context of something like Australia, where Aboriginal people have been disempowered for large periods of time. What is the validity of a framework that does not even engage with?
Okay, so I was getting a lot of chat messages saying the video wasn't working properly. So I apologize about that. What I want to do is just mention some of the things that are discussed within the video. So this person's name is Dr. Narayan, and he really talks, one of the things that I found really insightful was that he talks about cultural competency being about knowledge, attitude, and skills. So all of these three things can lead you to being culturally competent. So with knowledge, that's really just being open to learning and gathering information from people as well as resources so that you can have a better understanding of how various cultures are in terms of their history as well as evolution of their history, how they are seen in society today, advantages, disadvantages, all of these different aspects for culture. But with that, you have to think about your attitude. So you have to be able to be open-minded. You have to be able to fully listen. I think we are all in a society that tells us we need to have all of the information. We need to know what's going on all the time, but that's really not practical. It's hard for us to admit when we don't know something, right? So as long as you can stay humble and open to learning and admit if you don't know something, then that's going to help you with being able to accumulate knowledge on different cultures. And I feel like the most important thing with that is understanding that you might make a mistake when you are trying to best serve somebody. Because if you're not of that same culture, you can't expect to know all of the answers, right? So if you do happen to make a mistake when serving somebody, if you make an assumption, for example, just be able to apologize sincerely and genuinely, and then just correct that mistake. And then just do better the next time. As long as you can be open to listening and learning from people, then it's going to help you, and in order to get those skills that this doctor was talking about. So the skills can also look like challenging stereotypes. So this is something that does take practice. I myself have been doing different trainings on diversity and social justice trainings for probably like 3-4 years now. And I am always struggling with challenging stereotypes because it's hard, right? But this is a skill that we can work on. So if we adapt to these skills, embrace the knowledge, and try to alter our attitudes, then this is all going to help us to reach that cultural competent level.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add on to that. Through the video, one of the critiques that the speaker has is this perception of being culturally competent, which is a very descriptive way of looking at working with others. Because when you're saying you're competent, it's saying that you have more knowledge and understanding than they do about whatever the topic, in this case, cultural specific. So really looking to, go ahead and advance the slide there. So really looking to be more and have more humility is really what you're hearing within our discussion, and being open to the different perspectives and backgrounds, not making those assumptions that we just naturally have the inclination to do when we have people walk into our communities. So you see there, it's about accepting our own limitations, and really it's looking inward at ourselves before we go to look at working with the community. And I think that we have just naturally within our profession, we do this pretty well in terms of how we interact with our communities. I think when we start to look at the types of programmings that we're offering, events that we're offering, that there's some opportunity to have some improvement in those areas as well.
Sorry, y'all, I hit the wrong button. One moment. Okay. Let me make sure that you can see this. Yes. So this next part is talking about a colorblind society. So being colorblind is basically a way of saying that you don't see color, that everybody is the same to you, right? And although it seems like a nice thing because you want to view everyone as equal, at the same time, you're not being mindful of everyone's uniqueness and their individualism. It's also saying that you don't see someone's struggles, or you don't see that they are still oppressed to some extent in society. So although it seems like you're wanting to be mindful of just seeing everyone as equal, that isn't always the case. So there's a saying of just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But some people don't even have boots, right? So we have to be really mindful about this colorblind terminology, because you need to adopt your mindset that you can't just ignore someone's uniqueness and individualism. So how can we truly serve a community if we don't recognize all of these different parts of their identities that makes them who they are? Another example can be that you end up, again, assuming that everyone is the same, like socioeconomic status. We all have the same interests. Everyone has the same ability status. Everyone requires the same resources. But we know that our communities are extremely diverse, and so those things simply can't be true. So in that regard, we have to continually adapt our services and best understand the communities that we are serving, so that we don't have this colorblind approach, because if we do, then we're not being effective in how we're serving everyone. Because you have to have an equity mindset. How you serve one group might look different from how you serve another based on the unique needs that each of them have.
Absolutely, and I would add, the example that I like to use when we're talking about this is interacting with folks of different heights, right? So I'm about 5'11", and I would interact with differently with someone who's 6'4" in comparison to someone who's 5'4", right? So having that ability to connect with members of our community based on those differences. I wouldn't turn around and interact with the shorter person by looking over their heads, and I wouldn't interact with the taller person.
I think we lost Brandon. Or is it just mine?
No, I think I had lost connection for a second.
Okay.
All right. So real quick, I was talking about and connecting with others based on their height, and I wouldn't talk to someone who's taller than me in the same way I would talk to someone who's shorter than I am, right? I would look each person in the eye rather than looking above their head or looking at their chest just to speak.
Awesome, thank you. So for this, I want to read the definition out loud, and then what I would like for you to do is put into the chat any words from this definition that stand out to you. So culturally responsive. Culturally responsive refers to the process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, spiritual traditions, immigration status, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. So I'll give you a little bit of time to put in the chat any words that stand out to you from that definition. Affirms, values, individuals, responds respectfully, effectively, systems. Yeah, so some of these terms that you are highlighting here are words that I also highlighted. So for example, one of the words that I highlighted was individuals and systems. So when I was thinking about this definition, it made me think about Fresno State, where I currently work. And we have one of our values as an institution being diversity. So I too value diversity. However, when I talk to students on campus, just because the institution says they value diversity, it doesn't, some of these students feel like they aren't fully supported in their diverse identities. So when we are thinking about these different terms, we have to not only like talk the talk, but walk the walk, right? So with this, I highlighted individuals and systems because it's up to each individual within the organization, as well as the organization as a whole, to make sure that we're being respectful and effective. You can say that you are valuing diversity, but it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually be acting this out in your values. And it's also something that they touch base on in the video, right? So it's about working on your knowledge, attitude, and skills. So this definition and culturally responsive is saying that while we're gathering the knowledge, we're also changing our attitude and adapting to our skills so that we can be culturally responsive. And again, this is constantly going to be a working and evolutionary process, but as long as we are engaging with one another, learning about our communities, then we can reach this level of culturally responsive.
Absolutely. So as we move on to the next slide, looking at what does this then look like, right? So This three-dimensional type of model of cultural competence, and again, competent is there in quotation marks just because of our previous conversation about competence, but having a critical awareness of ourselves. So again, a lot of this work is done within ourselves so that we have this understanding of our own biases, our own assumptions. What are some of the stereotypes that we are aware of and maybe we even subscribe to in many cases, so that we start to work on ourselves before we do anything externally. We have to have that understanding of what's our baseline currently, and then we can move on from there. So looking at the skill development, having the ability to communicate effectively and build trust within diverse backgrounds. I have lots of discussions about diversity, not only in face-to-face, but on on social media and things like that. It's always interesting. I'll get comments from someone who's kind of just watching in on the conversation about the other person I'm speaking with or communicating with. And one of the key aspects for me in having those conversations is having an understanding of who that person is and what's in their heart, essentially, right? And how that conversation tends to take place within the context of whatever the topic is. But that ability to effectively communicate is important because it does build that trust. Having the ability to say, my apologies, I didn't understand that this was offensive, is a very simple and easy way to walk something back while still having and building that trust amongst individuals. And unfortunately, typically in our society, we get defensive when something is brought up that we may have offended someone, right? So rather than taking a step back and saying, wait, hold on here, what was the offensive remark, getting some understanding about why that is offensive to that person, and then again, saying the apologies and then moving on from there, but building that trust within your community. And then the third point is the organizational supports, and really looking at within your organization, what are the structures, what are the policies that are currently in play and in place to help you meet the needs of your communities. So as Sophie mentioned, treating everyone the same, or that colorblind perspective, doesn't lend authenticity to your wanting to meet the needs of the entire community, right? The example I use is I'm working with a few communities here in the area on Parks and Rec master plans, and we're looking at what are the services and programs that those communities are interested in. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we find out is what are those smaller underrepresented groups within your communities, and what are the types of programming that they are interested in. So when we're doing surveying, and again, I'm gonna geek out a little bit here, but when we're doing surveying, we look at the total population and then what's the percentage and breakdown within that population. So say you have a population of 80% Hispanic or Latino. When you're going out to do random surveys, you can imagine that most of your responses are going to come from that 80%. If you have a 10% population that identifies as white, their perspectives probably wouldn't be heard within your overall survey because that 80% is a stronger voice, would drown out those smaller communities. So what we look to do when we're doing surveying, in particular with these Parks and Rec master plans, is who are those, or where are those, or what are those groups that are not highly represented, and let's go find them and have conversations with those groups so that we can get an understanding of the types of programs and services they may be interested in. We may find that the services that they would like are similar or the same, but we may also find that they are looking for different types of programming. And by just simply doing an en masse survey, we wouldn't be able to find that information out from those groups. Meet the needs of the people within your communities. It's going to take some extra effort. When one of the things we look to do is find out who those groups are through the affinity groups within your community. So it may be the African American Chamber of Commerce. It may be different communities and what are their smaller groups in which they meet. And also having diverse staff. So who's representing you within your organization? Does your staff lend to a natural inclination that you are open to different and diverse information and backgrounds? If your organization is not reflective of the people in your community, it can have a negative message within your community. So some of the things to keep in mind as we move forward here as well. This next slide looks at socioeconomics. So we've talked about gender, we've talked about ethnicity, and we're finding this out right now with the COVID-19 situation, but looking at the different strata in terms of class within the United States, and who are our programs reaching out to? And how do we make sure that we offer the same opportunity to everyone within our community rather than just that working class, middle class, maybe the working poor that we tend to focus in on? And the question that I ask here is, what does your mission statement include within it? Right, so meeting the needs of your community are typically words that we find in most mission statements. And I look at it from a class type of perspective of, does your underclass within your community have the same opportunity to participate as the middle class or the working class through programs that you're offering for them? So if it's scholarship programs, do you, and I put in quotation marks, do you really promote them, or is it something that you have that you're, for lack of better words, just checking off the box that you have something for your community? Is it that you're putting the word out there that you have scholarship opportunities for community members? And then what does that look like? Are you asking for them to self-identify? Are you making sure that that opportunity is available for them? And then what are the limits within that? Oftentimes there's a set fee, or excuse me, a set amount of dollars that are allocated towards scholarship programs. And my question generally is, why do we stop at a particular amount, right? If we're there to really meet the needs of the community, why wouldn't we give an opportunity for everyone to have that chance of participating in our programs as well? So I understand the realities of finances and revenue generation and projections, but also looking at how do we meet the needs of our community based on those strata in class as well. So some of the implications for our services as we start to look at ways to address these concerns. So lifelong learning process, right? So continually having an understanding that we won't get to a point where we know everything. We're continually educating ourselves. Invite discussions of members of different cultural groups on a regular basis, right? So are you reaching out to those communities? Are you having open houses? Are you having opportunities for people to come in and speak with you about their programs? And maybe it's something you do once a month, maybe it's something you do every other month, where you have like a town hall meeting. So what are those opportunities? What are the current strengths and weaknesses within your organization in providing culturally responsive or competent services? So is it easy to navigate and to change up programming within your organization? I know some agencies run on a 2-year budget cycle, which could make that a little bit more difficult, right? But are we reflexive enough, and are we responsive enough to meet the needs of our ever-changing communities? Looking at what our mission statement says. So does it have wording in there about meeting the needs of our diverse community and everyone within our community? Developing some goals and identifying milestones to measure progress. So what does that look like, right, within your own communities? And I realize these aren't set standard, like I can take this and implement them within our organization, because we don't know what your organization looks like. So providing flexible solutions is what our goal is here, right? But looking at what are some of those milestones and making sure that we're reaching out and connecting with everyone within our community. Who are the parties that can help you engage with the communities within your groups, right? So we often talk about we have to have that herald or that cheerleader for our organization that helps us to get into the different groups that we're trying to meet their needs. So if we can find individuals like that, it definitely helps in building that bridge to working with and connecting with our entire community. And then lastly, looking at dedicated funds and resources to make improvements. And I know oftentimes we try to stay away from projects that identify a specific group within our community. But if that group is underserved, if that group is underrepresented within your programming structures, maybe that's something that we need to look at within your organization to make sure, again, we're reaching out, we're getting connected to our communities as a whole, rather than those who either walk through the door and or can simply afford our programming.
Okay, so what we want to do now is really have some conversations with you all. And actually, I think I'm on the wrong slide here, but we have a set of questions that we want to engage with each of you in talking about like our own experiences with our organizations. So let me pull those up real quick here.
Yeah, it should be the next slide, I think, Sophie.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So here's 3 different questions or scenarios that we want to talk about with you all. So I'll go ahead and read them, and then if you need some time to think about them, that's totally fine. And Brandon, I think for this one, we can go ahead and unmute people to give their insights. Okay.
Yeah, I think they should be able to unmute themselves as well when they want to chime in, and that might be a way to help that and facilitate that.
Thank you. So the first one is, over the last 5 to 10 years, what shifts in diversity have you seen in your community? Also, what benefits or challenges come with those shifts? And then the other one is, assuming there has been an increase in diversity, how has your agency programming adapted with those changes? And what additional opportunities are there to recognize the diversity in your community? So if you want to take some time to think about these, and then when you're ready to give some insight, we would love to learn from each other and hear about the different ways that you're embracing diversity in your community.
Yeah, and I'll just add some additional context. So as we've discussed through our session here, you know, the trends and the diverse communities that we have is shifting on a continual basis, right? So how are we within our communities keeping up with these trends? And we're definitely interested to hear what are the challenges that you're running into, but also what are the successes and or the benefits that you have within your organization or within your community that have allowed you to work with the diversity and the changes that you may be seeing happen.
I can add some information too, and Michelle actually touched base on this, of ongoing education to uninformed or unfortunately racist or bigot people. So for the leadership and social justice programs that I work with, first we were just leadership programs, but my team and I were constantly putting in social justice curriculum into our programs. And so that allowed for the administrators to see the need for social justice being in our title. So now we're leadership and social justice programs. However, there are some challenges because we were not given any additional funds to focus on providing social justice programs as well as leadership. So then that means that we're having to take away funds from existing programs to create new programs. So you can imagine how that's a little bit of a challenge. And then, as Michelle said, there's some people that are still uninformed or uneducated. And so some folks don't see the need for social justice content in our leadership conversations. So then that's where we come in having to have those sometimes difficult conversations with people. But it's definitely led to benefits because our students have shown us on surveys that they want that education in the leadership conversation. So that's one experience that I've had to answer that first question there.
Yeah, and I would add, I think through many of our programs and services, we have the opportunity for what I call kind of the great equalizer. In many cases, when we go out and we participate, we're not necessarily concerned about the ethnic background of others, which I see as an advantage, right? Because it's not the focus of the program, there's opportunity to introduce folks to each other in a non-threatening manner. That may give us that ability to dovetail into those more stringent and stronger conversations that Sophie is talking about. So when I used to play basketball on a regular basis, I really didn't care who was out there and who looked like what, right? I didn't really care what their political background was because I was there to play basketball and to engage with the community members that were there as well.
We have a few people that sent in some responses here.
Yeah, I see one from Rachel that says, only shift I see is more homeless in the community, which we're seeing across the state, and actually being transported out from different areas. We run into that quite a bit here in the Central Valley, especially as spread out as we are as well. And what we find that, interestingly, cities and municipalities don't have a progressive perspective of working with the homeless and trying to address the homeless concern. And what typically happens is they're kind of passing the buck and pushing that population out to our more rural populations. I sit on the board of a transitional housing nonprofit here in the area, and we see that on a regular basis. We're actually looking at a summit to look at the homeless concern moving forward. But I think one of the things that we're seeing with COVID-19, which is interesting, is that community centers are now being open to the homeless population, right? Which I think is a great way to show the need for such services and being able to provide services to that community as well. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge that is continuing to grow, and especially as our weather gets nicer and nicer this year, I think will continue.
Another comment I see is from Santino Lopez, talking about how there's been an influx of Asian cultures moving in. And so I think that's awesome that you all are looking at new programming that might meet the needs of the Asian cultures. And then I also can relate to you in terms of adjusting to language barriers. So that's something that we've experienced at Fresno State. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and we also have a large international student population. So a lot of our programs, international students will come to them, and there's been terms that we'll say, and they don't, maybe they don't resonate with that term. So for example, the word sibling, I realized that one of the students in the group, they had no idea like what that word meant. So luckily they felt comfortable to speak up and say, like, I'm not sure, like, what is that word? And so then we could think of other terms to use. And so that stuck with me, and now I've tried to take sibling out of the conversation and just say like brothers and sisters, for example. But another one, because we are a Hispanic serving institution, we are trying to embrace our Spanish language on campus. So one of the things we've done is actually have a program completely in Spanish. So it's called Social Justice in Espanol. And a lot of times these students feel like they're frowned upon if they are speaking Spanish. So we've tried to turn that around so that they can fully embrace it. and we've seen a large increase of sense of belonging. So it's kind of like trying to change, I guess, like the status quo, or like what is appropriate or not appropriate in terms of like languages to use. Instead of them feeling like they need to adapt to us, we're trying to adapt to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, Jackie is discussing her senior community and the shifts in ages, as well as the types of programming and activities that they're interested in. And again, I think we do a pretty good job throughout CPRS talking about the ages and the shifts and how we're moving towards more active recreation. She also, or he or she also includes the influx of racial diversity and how they've adapted with their informational flyers and showing different languages and introducing classes. I think this is a huge point in that if we're looking to reach out to and connect with the community, then we've got to do it in a way that they feel comfortable in engaging with our services. I was just reading an article on intergenerational kind of trauma that folks have, and it's really based off of the experiences of their parents or grandparents and how that trickles down through conversations within the family. There's also some genetic discussion that goes along with that. But in terms of including people of different diverse backgrounds is important. In the aspect of oftentimes for marginalized groups and underrepresented groups, if they don't see themselves participating in your program in some form or fashion, so on your brochure guide, photos of people who look like them on your website, then they may make the assumption that you're not seeking their participation. And this is something that unfortunately is real, and that is handed down from generation to generation. The example I use is when I graduated from Fresno State. When I first came to Fresno State, there was a certain community that we did not go into as people of color, right? So, and then 20 years later, I have students who are saying the same types of things, right? So it's an interesting perspective in that even though this community has done a lot to try and mitigate those concerns of white supremacy taking place and neo-Nazi groups within their community to combat this, and they've done a admirable job to this point, there's still that perception of people who have darker skin are not welcomed within that community, even 20 years later. So yeah, having this opportunity to incorporate those folks into your programming, into your marketing, and really letting them know that they're wanted is really a major key in reaching out to your communities. Again, going back to that 80% of one group, if that group is portrayed on your material, again, it may raise the alarm for people that you're not really interested in meeting their needs.
This idea that Brandon touches on for making sure that you are coming across as a welcoming organization is also highlighted in a comment from Myra, who mentions that they have translating telecommuting systems. So even by having these different forms of resources to help with communication and providing services, if they know that you have these different resources, they're going to feel welcomed and that they should be coming to your facilities. So I just want to highlight that part as well. And that could even be something that you maybe provide on your website, showing what sort of resources you have. And also I noticed that in that same comment, they're intentional about hiring staff who speak the language of their community as well.
Yeah, I see one, about community, and I think it's Angela. Our department only funds facilities that are in low-income communities. The facilities that are not dirt poor don't get funding to enhance programming and entice the community to come out. to the facility. And I think this is an excellent point in that meeting the needs of the different pockets within our communities as well. I don't think we're advocating for not serving a particular group within our community because of their affluence, but looking at how can we meet their needs in addition to meeting the needs of those in the lower socioeconomic areas. And this can be done in a myriad of ways. When we talk about pricing within our curriculum, one of the more controversial strategies is do we offer the same price across the board to every citizen within our community and just have a flat price? Or should we, or do we look at having kind of a stratified pricing structure that may be more equitable for everyone, right? And those are difficult conversations. Those are difficult things to really facilitate within our communities. Essentially, we're saying we're going to charge one person one price, charge another person a different price based on their needs and their particular circumstances within our community. It's similar to the discussion of a flat tax, right? And if you've had those discussions, which we won't jump into here, but looking at what's the equity within our pricing structure, and are we pricing certain individuals out of our programs because of the need to make revenue generation?
We also have a comment from Michelle who talks about role modeling instead of lecturing, using appropriate terminology, pronouns, etc. I think that's huge. If you are setting a good example or role modeling the type of behavior that you expect your staff to have, as well as just the organization in general, you're pretty much setting the tone of, for example, if you're setting a tone of being culturally competent, your folks that you're serving are going to notice that. And I also want to touch base on something that Brandon talked about earlier in terms of having like trusting organizations, and our initial instinct is to potentially get offended if we do make a mistake and someone corrects you. But I want us to try to like reframe that mindset and see if someone is to tell you, when you said this, you offended me because XYZ, whatever. See that as actually like receiving love. Like if someone gives you feedback on something, that's just a way of showing that they care about you, because if they didn't care about you, then they would just let you go off and make that same mistake over and over and over. But if they're taking the time to correct you and tell you, hey, I just want to let you know that that was actually an inappropriate term that you used, then you're going to be more prepared and educated the next time around. So really see that feedback as receiving love, and allow yourself to be vulnerable in those situations, because then you're going to be able to learn from those mistakes that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch upon that as well. Really what we're discussing throughout our entire conversation this afternoon is the concept of differentiation, right? So in teaching, we look at differentiation of how do we reach out to the 45 students that we have in our class to try and make their learning equitable within this time frame that we have, right? With everyone's different learning styles, how do we incorporate something that will meet the needs of everyone within that class, which is not an easy thing to do. And the same thing when we talk about communities of 15,000, 20,000, 50,000, and so on and so forth. But how can we move more towards that differentiation where we're meeting the needs of those within our communities individually, and having that understanding that, as Sophie was mentioning, if someone does express to you why something is offensive, then to kind of taking it for that person and that individual, and then the next time you interact and engage with that person, hopefully you remember those things, right? The example I like to use is utilizing the N-word, right? Not a word that I use, that my children use, and so on and so forth. But there are people who look like me who don't mind if other people who do not look like me use that word, right? And I've had this happen in social situations where it's like, all right, you're fine with that word, that's fine if they address you that way, but don't address me that way, right? So the same thing in terms of working with our communities is find, to the best that we can, find those groups that are going to share information with you. Take it as valid information, heartfelt information, and then utilize that moving forward, still with the understanding that this still may not be representative of everyone within that community. And that's a really hard thing to do, right? I have a comment here from Adrian, is new to the position, taking on the task of translating some of the documents for their programs. He's a native, or they're a native Spanish speaker, and really taking the opportunity to reach out to those communities. And I think that's key, right? In various formats and times, we hear that we shouldn't be translating information in Spanish for our communities, and I just think that's the wrong way. When I used to run aquatics programs, the one year I chose to have our shirts in English and Spanish, and this was about 15 years ago, and I was not prepared for the backlash that created, with the realization that the community that I was working in is 80% Hispanic, right? And probably 70% Spanish speaking, or at least dual language, and trying to reach out to that community, and the backlash that was presented was interesting at that particular point.
I also want to say that, well, first, I really appreciate everyone's comments. Like, I think this is awesome. So thank you all so much. But just by you, like, taking the time to be in a session like this and have these conversations already shows that you have a commitment to creating more diversity within your organization, or just embracing the diversity of your communities. So I just want to really commend everybody for that, because I know that this is challenging work, but I personally feel it's super important, and I'm just thankful that you're all here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I double up on that as well. Not really knowing how the session was going to go, being that it is a virtual format, and this is typically a topic that Sophie and I like to present in person, just because of that connection that we can build. But your participation throughout, all the comments and the chat, has been amazing. Definitely appreciate your participation and helping us to make this a very, very smooth overall session. I think smoother than we probably envisioned at some point. So I know we've got about 5 minutes remaining. So I would throw out, are there any questions or additional perspective that you'd be interested in? We've kind of touched on some of your own individual situations and discussions, but if there are any specific questions that you may have, or thoughts that additional thoughts that you'd like to share as we kind of wind things down. So we had a question on the digital version of the training pamphlets. Unfortunately, no. But I would definitely reach out and we can have a conversation of developing something for your community in particular. Again, a lot of the information that we provide is kind of general, I call it 35,000 view, 35,000 foot view perspective to start the conversations, and not wanting to be prescriptive, but working with communities and the ability to craft something that works for your communities, rather than kind of pulling something that may have worked for another one.
And I think Chase can correct this if it's incorrect, but I want to say this is going to be recorded and put on their website too.
Yeah, I was going to let folks ask any other questions they had, but
Sure.
well, it's a good time now to ask folks while you're still here, if you had any objections to your commentary being posted. I think for the most part, because we use the chat, Sophie and Brandon were reading out just a first name saying, you know, Michelle has this comment, so I don't believe there's any sensitive information or any particularly inflammatory comments were made, but I do want to ask you to reach out to me if you would rather not be included in that. We can work on editing it or removing you in some meaningful way, because we would like to host this for folks who weren't able to attend.
Mm.
So yeah, just let me know, chase@cprs.org. And I've got another post in the chat here, the link to our survey. We've got an evaluation set up that just asks you how you felt about the session, whether you have stuff that you can take back to your workplace, things that the instructors might like to know. And then that's also the place for CEUs, as I've been on and on about. So just let me know. And if there's anything else we can do going forward, let us know down at HQ. I am available by email anytime, and I can reach out to our instructors and get you resources and things like that. I think the last open item was people asking about the YouTube video that didn't play. If you had that link handy to maybe put in the chat.
Yeah, we'll grab that link and make it available for you. Chase, there were a couple of questions on additional sessions that we might be doing, or would it be appropriate for us to leave our email contact in the chat, so if people want to reach out individually, they could
absolutely.
do so? Okay.
Yep, and I'm fine passing that back. If folks reach out afterwards, if you're amenable to that, I can let them know that you're available to be contacted.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll put mine in the chat. Definitely reach out if you are interested in having further conversations. I know based on our availability and our schedule, Sophie and I would love to come to your organization and do some different discussions with either staff or community groups, or help facilitate discussions. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'll see how we can help in any way that we can.
Excellent. And for those who are interested in more of these CPRS sessions, as I said at the beginning, we are going to be hopefully working with our presenters who were not able to present on the Friday that we had to cancel. And so if you've been waiting on a session that you were supposed to attend, keep an eye on your inbox. We're going to start, we're going to keep doing these this week. We've got one every day and then 2 on Friday. And we will go on from there probably later in April. We'll set things up and we'll have a nice web page that tells you what's upcoming. For right now, we wanted to see whether it was a viable option and gauge our response. And you guys have been great, turning out in great numbers, and been very courteous and respectful. So I really appreciate it on the CPRS side as well.
Absolutely.
I know the digital shift has been difficult for a lot of people, but everybody has been very positive, and they're taking to the new technology great. And that's what I'm learning, coming from the training side and learning about park and recreation, is that the one stereotype that everybody fits so far is that they are resourceful and adaptable, if nothing else. Make a lot out of a little. So we will make the best out of this situation too.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see the shift that everyone has made with everything taking place, and kind of without missing a beat. You know, from live and in person to virtual, and providing opportunities so that the learning and the growth still is occurring. So we appreciate you and CPRS staff, you know, putting these together so that we have an opportunity to get this information out across the state as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you so much, Chase. I was devastated that I couldn't be in person, and then you sent the email and I was like, oh, thank God there's still an opportunity.
Yeah, and we're going to keep looking into this. It's a great way to connect people, and we'll hammer out the details on, you know, all of the pragmatic stuff of getting people accredited and certified and all that stuff. But right now we wanted the knowledge out there. We wanted people who were excited to present something, and we're just right on the edge of getting to do it. Like I definitely didn't want to keep the presenters away for too long, because it's fresh in your minds, and then now we can all go on and worry about what comes next.
Absolutely.
All right, and I'm going to post that survey link right there again, just for anybody who needs it. And then, yeah, I don't know if you guys wanted to hang around. It feels like Q&A folks have had their chance, but any other questions? I can leave the chat open for a little while. But I know everybody's got somewhere to be as well, right?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a few more minutes if there's a more individual conversation or discussion that folks would like to have. I can definitely hang around for another 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, me too.
And I can grab this actually. Got somebody asking about our next webinar. We sent out an email to all of our CPRS members, and any of our other channels, social media and things like that, but I know that still doesn't get to everybody. But I've got this right here. This is our actual next one is tomorrow at 1, and that's a 90-minute session. We're calling it Getting in Your Customer's Way, Policies, Procedures, or People Maybe Driving Them Away. So we've got, we're running the gamut here. We opened the week with some heavier topics, and then but it's getting everybody on board with the digital format and learning about isolation and things like that. And then we'll move on to some business as usual, customer service stuff. We've got some great creating a positive culture in your workplace on Friday, things like that. So it's really all over the map, but it's based on who was available to help. And we can't thank you guys enough and everyone else for stepping up and volunteering your time like this and letting us fill those gaps. So we appreciate it. And then, yeah, we'll continue to send those emails as they come to for next week, or probably we might take a planning week, and we might be starting in a little further into April. But yeah, we will keep everybody updated on that.
Excellent. So we had a question. Would you recommend having different language forms? I would say definitely. I know for my kids' school, we get English, we get Spanish, and then we also get Hmong. So being able to convey that information in the various formats is important. I know financially for like brochures or anything that's consumable may be difficult, but providing the opportunity for people to gain access to that material, I think is important as well. So if you're still doing printout brochures, you may have a page dedicated to the various languages that are spoken within your community, and give them a phone number or resource to where they can get information in a manner that is easier for them to understand and comprehend, so that you're still getting that information out to them. Absolutely. And the language is an interesting one because there's just so many. For instance, in the local school district here, I think there's 55 different languages and/or dialects, right? So again, trying to realistically meet the needs of the majority of your community as best you can with the resources that you currently have, and then also looking to see what other resources may be available. You, as a resource, you may reach out to your university or community colleges to see if either there's a student who's fluent or a faculty member or a resource on those campuses that can do some translation for you if needed, if you don't have that resource in-house. So that may be an opportunity where you can tap into some of those resources within your community.
All right. Well, I think that probably wraps it up for everybody.
Cool.
I will say if you've got any other questions, you can pass them to me at Chase@CPRS, and I will pass them on to our instructors. And I just want to thank you guys again for coming out. And I know this is a challenging subject, and you adapted it. You pivoted very quickly to the digital format and made it work. So I really appreciate it. And,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And we'll definitely be in touch about more, I'm sure.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. You guys have a great rest of your day. And yeah, anybody else needs anything, just find me on the email.
Thank you.